Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Polish potato soup. That's right, soup is the ultimate comfort food, and this amazing Polish potato soup is one of the most comforting. And eating a bowl of this always makes things seem better. But the true comfort, the real relaxation, that comes from the process of making the soup, which I'm about to show you right now. And to get started, we'll take a few minutes and cut up some veggies and a little bit of Polish sausage. And what we're going to need is some carrots that we'll cut in half and then split lengthwise in half again. And then we'll turn those and cut across into like half-inch pieces. And then we'll basically do the same thing to the celery. And the reason we cut the rib in half before we slice it is because it's twice as fast to cut both halves at once than it is to cut the whole thing from one end to the other. And then we'll also need some onion, which we will peel and cut in half. And then we'll find the root end. And then we'll make some cuts straight down through the opposite end. And then simply turn it and slice across those cuts. And by the way, we're making soup, so precise cuts are not a big deal. Just get things close. That's all we ever ask. And then last but not least, we'll take a small piece of Polish kielbasa sausage, and we'll cut that in quarters. And then we'll turn it and slice it about every quarter inch. And by the way, in the spirit of full disclosure, I only showed cutting half the vegetables, just to show you how to do it. And you'll see the amounts in the written recipe, but it's going to be a whole onion, 2 ribs of celery, plus 2 or 3 carrots depending on the size. And then what we'll do once we have our Polish sausage sliced up is transfer that into our soup pot, which we placed over medium heat after adding in a couple tablespoons of olive oil. And what we'll do is cook that sausage stirring for a couple minutes, basically until it starts sizzling in that oil. Right? We don't really need to or want to brown it. We're just trying to flavor the oil before we add our vegetables. So once that sausage has sizzled for a couple minutes, we'll go ahead and add our carrot, celery, and onions, and we will cook that stirring for about 5 minutes or so, or until those pieces of onions go from bright white to sort of translucent, and our veggies start to soften and sweeten up. At which point it's time to add some, but not all of our potatoes, which if we're good at time management, we will be slicing while our veggies are cooking. And what I'm going to use is about 2.5 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes, although russet will also work. And what we'll do after peeling them is cut them in quarters and then slice across every quarter inch or so. And you don't have to, but for best results, I'm going to slice 2 of my 6 potatoes and then transfer those into some water and into the fridge so I can add those into the soup later. And I'm going to explain why as we move forward. But anyway, I'm going to reserve this ½ pound and then slice the other 2 pounds exactly the same way. And we'll transfer those into our sautéed vegetable and sausage mixture. And we will give those a quick stir so we can coat them with that extremely flavorful oil, which may or may not do anything, but it feels right and it's part of the ritual. And then once our potatoes are in, we can transfer in some chicken broth, or I guess a roasted vegetable broth if you're going vegetarian. And if you are, you can sub mushrooms for the sausage, which I've done, and it's incredibly delicious. And then I also like to add a little splash of water, as well as a generous pinch of salt, some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a shake or 2 of cayenne. And then we'll follow that with a bunch of ingredients that make a potato soup, a Polish potato soup. And that would be some quartered and sliced up dill pickles. Whoops, one tried to escape. As well as a nice big splash of that pickle juice from the jar, which is wonderfully acidic and briny. And then speaking of dill pickles, we will also stir in a whole bunch of freshly chopped dill. And at this point we'll want to raise our heat to high, since we want this to come up to a simmer. And while we're waiting, we'll add the last ingredient we need at this stage, which is about 1/3 cup of sour cream. And please note, when you stir that in, depending on the brand you used, you might see some tiny particles of sour cream float to the surface. But don't worry, that's totally normal and very common. And I promise you, by the time our soup is done, that will have disappeared. And that's it. We'll simply wait for everything to come to a simmer, at which point we'll back our heat down to medium-low, and we will simmer this, stirring occasionally, for about 45 minutes, at which point it's probably going to look like this. And because of the fresh dill and those dill pickles we put in, the fat that floats to the top is going to be a very unique, some might say odd chartreuse color. But don't worry, the final soup is going to be gorgeous. Oh, and one quick reminder, we only put 2 pounds of our potatoes in, And we still have that half a pound we sliced and reserved in the fridge, which as you'll see, we're going to add soon. But before we do, I like to take a potato masher, and I like to go around smashing and mashing for about 30 seconds, just to break up those cooked potatoes a little bit and release some additional starch. And by the way, you can do the exact same thing by just stirring this a lot as it simmers. But the point is, we want to break up those cooked potatoes pretty well at this point, since that's basically what's going to thicken the soup. And that's it. After a brief mashing, our soup's going to come back to a simmer, at which point we'll drain and add our reserved sliced potatoes, which again for me was about a half pound of my 2.5 pounds total, and we'll stir those in. And then we'll let this continue to simmer, stirring occasionally for another 40 to 45 minutes, or until those potatoes we just added are very tender, and our soup is looking exactly how we want it to look. So let me grab a ladle so we can see what's going on. And by adding those potatoes halfway through the cooking, we're going to have the best of both worlds. We're going to have a potato soup where the potatoes have fallen apart and have thickened everything up beautifully. But then we're also going to have these beautiful intact pieces of potato so that we're not eating a soup that has the same texture all the way through. And we're definitely going to want to grab a spoon and give things a taste to make sure, like I said, those potatoes are perfectly tender, as well as we want to check for seasoning. And a potato soup almost always needs another pinch of salt. Right, there's only 2 ways to screw up a potato soup. One is not enough salt, and one is undercooked potatoes. So we really need to check for both. So I toss that in, as well as I like to finish up with some more fresh dill. And once all that's been stirred in, we will give it a final taste for seasoning. And if it tastes right, and mine did, we'll go ahead and ladle that into a nice warm bowl, which is hopefully located next to some buttered bread. And by the way, I use goat butter, which is super white, which explains the brighter than usual appearance of the bread. But anyway, I think you're going to want some bread alongside. And then to finish this, I'm going to go with a dollop of sour cream, which we will top with a sprinkling of freshly picked dill. And that's it, our Polish potato soup is ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, is a truly remarkable bowl of potato soup. I mean, I'm fine with a basic, regular, plain potato soup, but when you add in the flavor of that kielbasa sausage, and the mysterious magic that dill pickles and pickle juice provide, plus the creamy tanginess from the sour cream, when you add all those things in, you produce something that's so much more flavorful and interesting, and as I promised, beautiful to look at. And I know it was an extra step to save part of our potatoes and add them halfway through, but texturally speaking, I think the payoff is totally worth it. Right, usually potato soups are one texture or another. Right, there's the style where all the potatoes pretty much fall apart, and then there are the brothier versions of potato soup where all the potatoes are in chunks. Well, here, thanks to one easy extra step, we actually get to enjoy both textures. So I've made my case. The rest is up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the grand poobah of how to make your zuppa. But as long as you're not going to forget to put them in, I highly recommend you do it like I did. And as I mentioned in the intro, eating a bowl of soup like this is extremely comforting. But for me, the true relaxation is the actual process making the soup, and the meditation of cutting those vegetables, and then being able to watch that soup simmer. All right, all that stuff's going to quiet your mind and refresh your soul. All right, don't think of cooking something like this as work or a task or a chore. Think of it as a fun, relaxing activity. But no matter how you think of this, it really is an incredibly delicious, satisfying, and hearty soup, which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.